The short video you're about to watch details an electrical safety incident that happened at Oaky North Mine in December 2018, the week before Christmas. We have made this video to contribute to knowledge sharing throughout the industry in the hope that others may learn from this event. This incident occurred because one of our team members made an inadvertent mistake and came into contact with live electrical conductors. The final act in a sequence of shortcuts and non-compliant work practices. These actions by other people effectively laid a trap, and Craig's own inadvertent action very nearly cost him his life.
On the 16th of December 2018, it was a Sunday, at about 8 a.m. in the morning we lost power. At about 2 p.m. that day we'd actually restored power to the site and were starting to reventilate the mine and power back through to the face. This was obviously ongoing throughout the afternoon, and at 6 p.m. when the afternoon shift started, they were given their allocated task to continue on with this process.
I'm an electrician at Oaky North underground coal mine, and I've been an electrician for approximately 30 years. It was a night shift, so start at 6 p.m. When we arrived, we found out that the power had been off for most of the day. Power had been restored, but there was a bit of urgency to get the main belts up and running.
Yeah, the atmosphere was very busy. It was intense, and it's, you know, when we're down, it's all about getting back and running so we can get back onto coal. Yeah, it was go, go, go. We were told that TCO1 hadn't been running. We needed to go and get the belt going and get back onto production. And then we got a call that some fellas needed a part delivered underground.
Sam and I went over to the hard stand to a spare belt starter where we removed a current transformer that was required, loaded into the drifty and went underground to 504.
So when we got there, there were the 3 electricians with the doors were open. There was no lights. It was quite noisy, and we did assume that the isolation was dead and that they would have isolated the sub, you know, for their own safety, I suppose.
The power was off, or we thought the power was off. It was dark, and they had a door open, and one of the electricians had told us that he just replaced the current transformer, but he still wasn't getting a result. Him and Sam walked around the other side to look at some drawings. I just visually traced out some wiring, and the wiring went down and got behind a bunch of other wires. So I just reached in and give the wire a pull so I could identify where it went.
I just heard this big moan, and it didn't sound good at all. The day before, he did mention that he had some chest pain, and I thought he may have been having a heart attack. It wasn't until he sort of came to and said, I think I put my hand on something, that I realised he'd got an electric shock.
The main pain was my arms. Both arms from elbow to fingers really hurt. I didn't know what I'd hit, but I knew it was quite severe because of the pain level. It spun me out of the cubicle. I remember taking 1, maybe 2 steps and then fell to my knees.
So I got him to sit down and just try and breathe, and kept talking to him. And the other boys were sort of in a little bit of shock, and one of them came out saying, "There's a zip tie," screaming, "There's a zip tie, there's a zip tie in the enclosure on the limit switch," which is a safety device. If you fail to isolate, that limit switch should open and drop the power to that cubicle.
He lifted me and we walked out to the roadway where there was a cool breeze. Sat me on the front of a drifty, and then just till I regained a bit of sense about myself.
He was definitely altered. Like, his consciousness was in and out. He was sort of off with the fairies. I decided to get Craig in the drift runner and head out of the pit, just due to the fact that his heart may have been in some sort of abnormal rhythm, being hit by 1,000 volts. It's roughly a 25-minute drive from the bottom of the pit back to the surface or the go line. I wanted to reduce that time to get him the help that he needed.
On the journey to the surface, he phoned through to comms on his mobile phone and advised them of the accident and my condition.
I did keep talking to Craig, making sure he was all right. He was still a little bit lightheaded.
Yeah, we arrived at the go line. The first aid officer was standing there waiting for us. We got out of the drifty, walked towards him, threw my belt and hat on the ground and just kept on walking. About 20 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. And when he arrived, he put me on an ECG machine as well as conducting his tests. And then the decision was made to take me into town to the hospital. On the way, I rang my wife just to let her know what had happened. I was okay, but I was on my way to hospital because I'd received an electric shock. My wife and daughter drove down from Townsville the next day, and when they arrived, the looks on their faces really drove home the seriousness of what had just happened to me. The tears of the wife and the report from the cardiologist as to how lucky I was to survive the accident, it really drives home that maybe I am lucky to be here at the moment.
You sit back and you think about, you know, how close you could have been to losing not only a workmate but a really good friend and a good mate, you know.
Looking back, I'm probably fortunate to be left-handed, as when I reached in, holding the door and reaching in with my left hand, the shock spun me out of the cabinet, away from the bus bars. If I was a right-hander, I may have got hung up in the cabinet and the result would have been a lot different.
I walk in now and whether someone's locked on and whether they've told me that they've locked on, I'll always go and make sure I've got a lock on, whether they think, you know, it needs to happen or not.
A week after the accident was Christmas Day, and we were sitting around at a family lunch, and my father-in-law came up behind me, gave me a big hug with tears in his eyes, and said, "Well, I'm so glad to have you here today for Christmas Day."
It could have gone a lot worse that night, and pretty lucky.
The biggest thing I've taken out of this accident is never to assume. I walked into a situation where I thought the power was off. I didn't do any other checks, and I reached in and the power was on. I was disappointed to find out after the accident that shortcuts had been taken and a Perspex cover removed from the bus bars, as well as limit switches on the doors being cable tied up to allow the power to be on at the time.
I don't think anyone envisaged that when they applied that bridge to the micro switch or they left that guard off, that the outcome was going to be someone touching a live buzz bar. But here we are sitting today with a person that was very, very close to having being fatally injured on site due to our non-compliance to our systems. So we need to ensure that at all times when we're conducting ourselves underground, that we're thinking about how we do it in a safe manner.
Unfortunately, in the mining industry, there is a culture of risk-taking, and I think it is seen to be heroic to be the person who puts their hand up to take those risks, and that is something that we need to turn around, because at the end of the day, there's nothing that's more important than somebody's safety.
Ultimately, there were 4 key takeouts from this incident: failure to isolate, failure to test for dead, modification of a safety device, and the failure to leave the plant in a safe manner after a maintenance activity. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, remember those 4 things. It just might save your life.
We're so fortunate that the outcome of this incident did not result in Craig losing his life. Ultimately, this electrical incident was a breach of our non-negotiable safe coal rules. And always remember, the people we all work for are not on site, they're at home.
Well, you've just had the opportunity to look through what was a pretty confronting moment for Oaky North Mine. A case of us understanding that the mine we thought we had was not, in fact, the mine that we had. But for me, the key takeaway, never assume. Never assume you're isolated. Never assume that someone else has tested for dead. Never assume that things are as you expect them to be. This, by every measure, was a free learning opportunity, but it shouldn't have been. This was so close to a fatality, I still can't reconcile how it didn't turn out to be so. So go back to your own operations and take an opportunity to learn from what we've learnt to understand the lessons that we've learned and ensure that you have the chance to check things in your own mind, to validate your own position and to make sure you don't have a similar level of exposure.
And we're just lucky that we still have Craig. Yeah, he's a top bloke. Yep.